All right, hi everyone, and welcome to the Coalition for Health AI, or CHAI, February webinar here. We're going to give it an extra minute or two. We have our presenters on currently, and then we'll go ahead and start sharing material and get underway. So just an extra minute or two for the rest of the attendees. Thanks. Welcome all that just joined. We're just going to give it an extra minute for the rest of the attendees to jump on, and then we'll get underway. Thanks. All right, looks like we're 2 minutes in. And I'm just going to look again at the queue and make sure that we have a majority of folks that are registered. And it looks like folks are still trickling in, so maybe another 30 seconds and we can get underway. All right, I think we have a good quorum of folks here. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So welcome all. My name is Greg Shemansik with the Coalition for Health AI, or CHAI. Welcome to our February webinar, the second webinar of this year. So very excited to have you all. Once again, thanks for folks that are joining us for this second installation. So today we'll be covering the topic area from regulatory clearance to lifecycle governance, future-proofing clinical AI. We'll have a presentation today from our speakers. I'll also encourage you to ask some questions in the chat up above. You'll see a Q&A section. That's where you can posit your questions or discussion topics throughout the presentation. We'll address in some part as we go, and we'll have some time on the back end for a Q&A section. So here's for our speakers. I'd like to welcome Dr. Inez Hoskar, who's the CEO and founder of Gesund.ai. Dr. Hoskar is a PhD trained engineer and serial AI entrepreneur with over a decade of experience building and scaling AI products in highly regulated healthcare environments. He is the founder and CEO of Gesund.ai, a governance platform focused on FDA-aligned validation, lifecycle management, real-world deployment of clinical AI, and the like. Previously, he founded and exited a machine learning company based on his doctoral work at Carnegie Mellon and led the machine learning division at the digital surgery company CareSyntax. A former Fulbright scholar, Dr. Hoskar is established extensively in leading medical and scientific journals and bringing a deeply personal, multi-generational connection to healthcare innovation. So welcome, Dr. Hoskar. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Samir Patel, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Gesund.ai. Dr. Patel is a board-certified neuroradiologist and Chief Medical Officer of Gesund, where he leads physician-driven AI validation, clinical study design, and real-world evidence generation for regulated medical AI. He is also director of the Division of Community Radiology Specialists at Emory University and an assistant professor of radiology, bringing deep frontline clinical expertise. With training in engineering, medicine, and business, Dr. Patel bridges real clinical workflows, regulatory grade evaluation, and patient outcomes to help ensure AI is safely and effectively deployed at scale. And finally, I'd like to introduce Ms. Tanima Ghosh, Director of Global Regulatory Affairs and Quality at Prenuvo. Ms. Ghosh is a senior regulatory quality and clinical affairs leader with over 30 years of experience across medical devices, combination drug device systems, digital healthcare, wearables, AI, ML, enabled software as medical devices. She began her career in research and development working on NASA space shuttles, payloads, and the like, bringing that same rigor to medical grade hardware, software, and complex systems throughout the full product lifecycle. Ms. Ghosh has led global regulatory approvals, commercialization efforts, and wide range of technologies. So welcome all, wide range of experience and deep experience at that as well. So Inez, if I can hand it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everybody. Let me share my screen to run through the slides. Okay. So you heard that the topic of today's presentation and discussion is about managing the life cycle of AI solutions in a responsible manner. You know, this is a hot topic for many, you know, not just for clinicians or technology developers, but also regulators and payers and alike. And we'll be talking, you know, to various, you know, latest trends in the field, as well as, you know, talk about some of the issues that we have highlighted in a real world case study through our work with Prenuvo. Thanks to our friend Tinimo Ghosh here. But maybe the one of the key points I'd like to drive here is that historically speaking, FDA regulated AI has been treated like a regular medical device, you know, when we're talking about the last 10, 15 years, and as though they're static, you know, products. And unlike devices and drugs, AI models, you know, there's many known and unknown unknowns. As such, we have to, you know, approach it carefully. So therefore, even though many technology developers focus on getting their first FDA clearance, you know, typically through a 510(k) pathway, it is only a small snapshot in time. And as we've seen from different regulatory bodies, not only the FDA, but it's also, you know, international counterparts across the world, we are now seeing the trend towards the life cycle, the overall AI continuum and its management. So that means taking a snapshot of your model is not enough to sustain evidence for clinical use, but also it creates both, you know, unpredictable and as well as potentially adverse outcomes from a clinical, financial, and operational perspective as they get deployed in the real world. Now, there are different concepts that have been introduced by various regulatory bodies, especially by the FDA. A Total Product Lifecycle, or TPLC, is a concept introduced through the agency's a draft guidance document approximately 12 months ago. It's about, you know, how do you establish the, you know, best practices and principles, you know, also called good machinery practices. And as many of our friends from the pharma biotech world can speak to, the GXP compliance matters is a similar principle. So how do you, you know, establish certain, you know, quote unquote hygiene to build safe and effective AI products? And given, you know, the data drift and model drift issues highlighted by, you know, scientific literature over decades, now the responsibility is on the technology manufacturers as well as clinical users to establish this governance perspective, not just as a one-off regulatory validation, but as a ongoing exercise that goes hand in hand with, you know, model updates and potential changes in the environment in which AI models are deployed, and picking on those changes through post-market monitoring efforts to be able to sustain, you know, clinically and business-wise responsible AI solutions. And as I alluded to, we also wanted to talk to you about specific data points we went through as Gesund and Prenuvo worked together to help secure the first FDA clearance for Prenuvo. But at this point, I would love for Tinimo to speak to some of the key issues the Prenuvo team have encountered as they went through the whole cycle.
Thank you, Inez. So the Prenuvo intended use of this device, the body composition device, is essentially a measurement device for non-invasive fat, organs, and muscles. So it's a QIH device. The Prenuvo challenge was to clear this device and then include long-term scale growth. So really the device was started out as a novel whole body MRI product. It's our first regulatory clearance, and we needed regulatory grade validation, physician-led evidence, and a foundation for long-term scalability. In essence, we wanted to start with a technology readiness level of 1, which is a conceptual design, generate our Q-sub, generate investigational device safety and effectiveness data, have a ground truth established with our annotation manuals, and then be able to pivot as we get into multiple variants and different markets. Next slide. The one-off validation creates a long-term regulatory debt. So essentially, the new product development from design inputs, user needs, verification, and validation is under tremendous regulatory scrutiny. There's no tolerance for ad hoc validation, and we want to avoid one-off studies because the documentation is quite fragile when you're at that early life cycle stage. And when we're rebuilding the post-clearance collateral, we want to be able to clear the device once and then scale it up. So essentially, you want to have a research stream and where you're going to determine your effect size, and then you're going to have your commercial stream where you'll be able to use that data to be able to determine what our acceptance criteria are, as well as the targets that you need to be able to validate in a actual simulated use condition. Next slide. So the regulatory grade validation requires clinical rigor, not technical benchmarking. So the clinical relevant cohorts, you'll have to be able to define all your subgroups. What's really, really key is data management. So Inez, I think you would agree, right? The data management, curating, collecting the data, taking that data and making sure that we have the requisite reporting, recording, trending, and iterations is really, really key to be able to have this clinical rigor. Would you not agree?
Absolutely, and there are different dimensions to driving this, regulatory grade evidence. And Samir, I would love for you to talk to, how you manage to establish the right cohorts and to be able to, work with your peers, and not just as a peer, a radiologist, but also as a supervisor adjudicating, individual who would have to establish these metrics and the common denominator, as we were, as part of the goal of this exercise was to, establish that ground truth, because, arguably medicine is as much as science as well as art, and some would argue that is more of an art than science. So it's definitely, not a straightforward all the time to establish that kind of, agreement between experts in their specialty. So we'd love to hear your experience as you work with, Tanima and the team and your clinician experts as you went through this process.
Of course. Thank you for teeing that up. Yeah, this is actually really important from the clinical standpoint, and this is where a lot of AI teams really kind of underestimate what the regulators actually mean by validation. Regulatory grade validation isn't just technical benchmarking, but it's actually clinical evidence, and that difference actually matters. The regulators are looking for clinical rigor, and that's starting with clinically relevant cohorts, but not these idealized data sets and not these edge cases that are added in after the fact, but actual data that reflects how the product will be used in real clinical settings. A second piece that often gets overlooked is the annotation quality and governance. With Prenuvo, our Gesund team worked closely with their clinical and regulatory teams to make sure that the annotation manuals didn't just describe the happy path, but actually explicitly covered the clinically meaningful edge cases. So things like ambiguous findings or borderline anatomy in cases where reasonable physicians might actually disagree. And that level of detail is not comfortable, but it is critical for creating a good product in the end. The annotation guidance doesn't tell readers how to handle the edge cases. Then you don't have a ground truth problem. You've actually got a hidden variability problem, and the regulators can easily sniff that out and can tell. The third piece that we worked with is transparent adjudication. As in medicine, disagreement isn't a failure, it's actually expected. And as Anna spoke about, this is an art, not a science, or it's a combination of both, and that disagreement is definitely expected. And so what matters when you have that disagreement is having a defined and auditable process for resolving it rather than just smoothing it away in the metrics. And finally, of course, traceability. Every label, every adjudication decision, every metric needs to be reproducible and defensible long after submission. The mindset shift is pretty simple. Regulatory validation is not marketing proof, but it's clinical evidence that has to stand up under sustained regulatory scrutiny. We can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Samir. Tarima.
Yeah, so the validation must be operationalized as a repeatable, auditable system. So again, access logs, the methodology to be able to look at these subgroups and confirm that you have true generalizability and representativeness from the data. So from the study design to submission, really the investigational device that you start with is going to accumulate the safety and effectiveness data, and then you're going to determine your effect sizes, and then you'll be able to come up with sample sizes. From that investigational device, you'll go through iteratively from a pilot through to data that you're actually going to be able to now use as 510K ready data. So the control data access and cohort definition is very, very critical so that you can demonstrate, how is your data representative of the US population. The model versioning and provenance, again, as it's not just your software, it's all the models and modules therein. It's all the data sets, including the training data set, the test data set, the tuning data set. And I'm sure that you would agree, Ines, that control of versioning and provenance is so critical so that you can do the what-if scenario side by side for the different models.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly why we at Gesund built a platform approach towards managing the AI lifecycle, because arguably, many teams can conduct a scientific study to assess model performance, but if you want to adhere to the latest and greatest from these 3-4 letter agencies to bring your AI product to market in a responsible manner, then you have to be able to govern it appropriately. It's about model management, it's about version control, it's about access control, it's about multi-user role-based access and collaboration, and the list goes on. I mean, as some of you in the audience may have tracked with the different publications that the FDA has released, whether that's on the Total Product Lifecycle or Predetermined Change Control Plan, all these principles and the expectations from the regulatory bodies are spelled out. Now you can try to do it on an ad hoc fashion, or you can develop a systems and platform approach to help this process scale as new standards emerge.
Yeah, and that expert annotation and adjudication, what's really key is you've got your measurement data set, then you've got from measurement, you've got your detection, your diagnosis, your triage, your prioritization, you have your scoring. So you have foundational data that you can actually use as you're evolving in your different intended uses. So, what was really important for us is to be able to have, fresh, clean, ground truth data and the interreader variability study data to demonstrate that we can meet our performance metrics, with a certain rigor. Ines?
Yeah, so the next slide, as we alluded to, clearance is the beginning of the very long journey. Many young entrepreneurs or startups might consider it as a ultimate success, but securing regulatory clearance is just a very early phase of a long journey, because now that you deploy the product in the real world, you have to monitor it appropriately, as the latest guidelines and rules dictate, and you have to measure how they behave, and you have to step in and not only because it's a responsible behavior to update your model to adapt to the changes in its environment, and accounting for the data drift and model drift matters, but also it is it behooves these AI teams to stay competitive. Because if you don't want to release the best AI model version that you might have, your competitor might. So therefore, quality is not only due to compliance reasons, but also because that's how innovation materializes. That's how you stay ahead of the competition. So therefore, regulatory clearance is definitely not an ultimate outcome, but it's the beginning of a whole area of responsibilities that you have to assume to be able to sustain your presence in the market with your product.
Yeah, and I can say also that one of the challenges for us is to decide, okay, well, what's going to be in the core device and what's going to be in the PCCP. So what we were able to collaborate together by basically looking at the simulated use conditions and the data that we're looking at for the different models that we have and the submodels that we have. And then we were able to say, okay, well, this is what's going to go in the core device, and this is what we're going to put in the PCCP with the actual specific. Here's the detail of the change. Here's the modification protocol we're going to make. And then here are the data sets that we're going to use to do that. And then here's the impact overall. So that once you would clear the core device, you would be able to get authorization to proceed with the PCCP as well.
And maybe to further emphasize the message here, it is an operating model. Total product lifecycle. It is perhaps a whole philosophy, so to say, how the AI companies must create and bring products to market. It's not a set of documentations. It's not a set of artifacts that you couple with your submission. It consists of a set of principles and processes that you have to adopt throughout the entire AI model continuum, from pre-market to clearance to post-market, monitoring and changes, as well as in many cases, probably in the foreseeable future, the retiring of AI model as new, AI solutions emerge, and you'll want to retire, or if for example, the population mixes evolve in a given geography, for example, and AI might be outdated, so you'll need to consider the retiring that AI product. So therefore, just like AI models are living and breathing organisms in a way, so is evidence. Evidence also evolves as the model evolves, as the environment and all the stakeholders that interact with the model evolve. Then that means that the evidence also evolves, and that's a living asset. And given it's a living asset, you shouldn't, our core principle at Gesund has been that you should treat evidence with that perspective, and not reduce it to just hundreds of Dropbox folders with thousands of files thrown around, and basically passed from one person to another with different a set of responsibilities, whether that's a data scientist versus a quality professional or a clinician. And so therefore, evidence management through the total product lifecycle becomes a real challenge as AI continues to evolve, and evidence continues to evolve. So therefore, you have to establish a platform approach to manage your changes and lifecycle governance in an intentional, traceable, and justifiable way. So not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because that's what the regulators expect today and in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that evidence and governance, I think what's really key is that if you're doing it right and you comply with QMSR, you're going to comply with the basic requirements for data management that will then be portable to new markets and new variants. And then you're not, if you don't have that solid sort of system in terms of the framework, it's not going to be auditable for all of those different jurisdictions. So, starting in the USA, porting it to the other MDSAP approved jurisdictions. This methodology allows us to port in those new markets with a quick timeline, and then collect all that evidence to be able to demonstrate that the models are performing per their performance requirements.
And as Tim alluded to earlier, Predetermined Change Control Plan, or PCCP in short, is an increasingly popular framework that the FDA has introduced several years ago. And as you might imagine, given AI models and the surrounding environments do evolve in due course to stay competitive and to stay responsible, manufacturers of AI technologies will have to update their AI solutions in a periodic fashion. But and that's where also the FDA and HHS and other relevant bodies have struggled, because the current regulatory management practices are not used to frequent updates or frequent changes, because most of the products these bodies have regulated in the past are static products, like devices and drugs that don't change as frequently as an AI model, which can change sometimes in a matter of days, definitely not years. So therefore, PCCP has emerged as a way to introduce this total product lifecycle principle and incentivize manufacturers to collect evidence throughout the lifecycle early on, from pre-market all the way to post-market. And as you outline the changes you want to exercise throughout an AI solutions lifecycle, then the regulatory body allows for you to update it without going back to square one, because the current pathways, regulatory pathways, require for manufacturers to conduct a new validation study and create the whole package of the whole dossier of submission from scratch every time they want to change even something small potentially in an AI solution. That's not a very fast-paced or innovation-friendly approach, as many technologists would argue. And the regulatory bodies stepped in to create these new mechanisms like PCCP to say, okay, what kind of changes do you anticipate, and what kind of downstream effects do you anticipate, and how do we, create a defensible life cycle evidence generation machine can we, bank on to make sure that those changes are indeed what you anticipated and what you delivered upon with new updates. So therefore, a responsible PCCP submission can definitely, help teams, manufacturers, manage their post market activities and turn them into those changes into non-events.
Yeah, I would submit as well that PCCP shouldn't be an afterthought. Shouldn't be in the middle of when you're writing your reg submission. You should be early on, early life cycle. You're going to do an investigational device. You want to do a pre-submission. Have your PCCP thought process ready. Here's what we anticipate including in the PCCP and in the core device. Here are the description of the modification of the changes, and here are some of the what-if scenarios that we've been able to, test out within the GDAP platform to be able to say, okay, these are the actual targets. These are the models that are going to go into PCCP, and here's how we're going to ensure the impact analysis of these PCCPs will remain within the safety and effectiveness boundaries that we've defined.
And from a clinical perspective, when you have that change that's predictable, that preserves our trust from clinicians. Even if there's a surprise change, even if it's for the better, that slowly starts to erode trust, and even more so if it's a change for the worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so that's how, and again, I think this is one of the more interesting slides because it touches on some of the latest updates from the FDA and the surrounding ecosystem because the buck is being passed from one stakeholder to another, and right now it is being felt on the post-market side, on the clinician end user side, as to how these evidence generation can be managed in a responsible and predictable fashion. Because everybody can attest that that deals with medical AI. Model drift, data drift, bias, degradation, all these issues exist. It's been proven. Now, how will that be measured for your specific product, for your specific cohort, or end user mix, or equipment, or whatever kind of externalities or variables that you have to account for? Now you have to establish, as a manufacturer as well as the end user, arguably, to monitor those changes and measure them and create a plan to account for them, and such that the AI model not only stays safe and effective, but also is still relevant. Because as Samir alluded to earlier, outdated solutions, be it AI or anything else that clinicians use day to day, if it's not relevant, if it does not move the needle, it'll be noise among all the signals that the clinicians have to deal with day in, day out. So therefore, the monitoring piece is becoming extraordinarily important for all stakeholders that touch AI, not just developers, but also end users and regulators, and as well as payers, obviously. And so therefore, all these multidisciplinary teams and stakeholders in the ecosystem have to invest in that post-market monitoring infrastructure to make sure that those targets can be hit and those models can be managed and the changes can be exercised appropriately. And as we alluded to, the GXP compliance has been part of the core principles in the broader, health tech, biotech, pharma industry, and good machine learning practices is also, what will help deliver on the post-market monitoring, among other, perhaps, better said, TPLC requirements. In other words, those are fairly, simple but not easy practices to exercise. There are these 10 tenets, for example. If you haven't seen the 10 tenets of GMLP, for example, you must not use training data for test purposes, because you would overfit your evaluation on a foundation of bias. Or you should have role-based access to model versions and data sets across training, testing, and tuning use cases, and the list goes on. And unless you bake in those, design principles, so to say, into your processes and workflows, then your evidence machine and the platform that supports it, like the one we have developed at Gesund, is going to be limited. It's going to break down the road. So therefore, whatever process or tooling you built to create this evidence generation machine has to account for these GMLP principles that have been updated earlier this year, and such that your AI product is compliant by design, not as an afterthought, which has been the case for many teams throughout the years.
Yeah, I would also submit that the data management SOP and work instructions that you're using are so critical to GMLP, right? So you have, here's how I'm going to collect the data. Here's where I curated the data. Here's how I recorded the data. Here's my subgroup analysis. Here's how I've actually identified these data sets and restricted access to those data sets. As Inez was saying, the training data set never should cross over with the test data set. So if you have solid SOPs and work instructions for the data management flow, that will help ensure that you are actually complying with the GMLP requirements. And those 10 points are across geographies, right? Canada, US, UK, and MDSAP jurisdiction countries. This is the key to make sure that GMLP is followed, and all of your team members are trained up to follow the GMLP.
Yeah. From a clinician standpoint, the clinicians are way too busy to think about this kind of stuff. And so if the clinicians even have to think or consider about compliance, then the system's already failed. We need to make sure that it's working, trust that it's going, and that's where GMLP really comes into play.
And so therefore, what we have been big proponents of is an infrastructure mindset from the get-go, because arguably, as I said earlier, clinical validation has been the crux of the whole healthcare industry for many products, devices, drugs, etc. But AI has thrown a new challenge at the whole space, because the speed at which AI keeps evolving. So therefore, we had to bring the best practices from data operations, data ops, and ML operations, ML ops, into an approach where you can manage the life cycle of an AI model, but also a portfolio of AI models. Think of it, the fact that what the pharma industry had to establish, basically managing a whole pipeline of drugs. They have to spend billions and billions to bring a single drug to market, but to get there, they have to invest all these extraordinary amounts of capital into tens, if not hundreds of drugs as they go through different phases of clinical trials. So therefore, that GxP compliance and the quality rigor has, disciplined the pharmaceutical industry to build a, infrastructure approach, so to say. But that being said, the infrastructure approach they had to take is nothing like, AI-enabled software as a medical device category, because drugs do not evolve at the same pace. So therefore, the kind of data ops and ML ops challenges, which have been solved by other non-healthcare industries, luckily enough, have thrown a different twist on this at this whole challenge. Meaning now you can actually learn from other industries, to basically manage your models, manage your data sets, manage your user groups, and the guidelines and the rules and regulations that spell out what kind of quality and compliance benchmarks you have to meet. And that allows for you to not only to maintain the AI model, but scale your AI portfolio in a smart way. Not only for one product, but multiple products, but also multiple jurisdictions, as Tanima said, because most of these jurisdictions actually speak the same language. Sure, there are different, nuances between jurisdictions as to how they expect the introduction of a specific product, but ultimately the core principles remain the same. So as you invest into an infrastructure as an AI developer, you have to consider the scaling, lifecycle management, and cross jurisdiction, readiness, and that's what we have developed at the company.
Yeah, and I would also add that the concept of portfolio of AI models, this portfolio are at different technology readiness levels, and we want to get this portfolio to the clinicians so that Dr. Patel can take a look at it and say, yes, I think this is something that we should push, or no, we need to make these tweaks. From a usability perspective, this allows us to get this portfolio of AI models in the hands of users, and then be able to have a research stream and a commercialization stream with a go, no go decision point that is collective and cross-functional. So all the team members together are able to say, yeah, you know what? Yes, they're going to push this. No, we're going to keep this here for a little while longer. right? Would you agree, Dr. Patel?
Yes, definitely. And that's kind of how we go about it in our clinical day to day. We need to make sure that all the data lines up with what we're seeing, and that's how we collect that evidence.
Speaking of teams, this is also one of the 10 tenets of good machine learning practices, is that AI is a team sport, as we have already alluded to, right? So there are clinicians, there are R&D people, there are data scientists, there are quality people, product people, business unit leaders, and software engineers, etc. And basically, it takes a whole village to raise one AI, right? So therefore, if anybody touches AI, be it the model, be it the data, be it the end user activities, you own the risk. So that means the burden is on you to help support the lifecycle governance. And arguably, many of these interdisciplinary teams have struggled in the past because, number one, they speak different languages. Data scientists are very different professions from clinicians, ostensibly, as well as quality and regulatory experts, and the list goes on. And they have different metrics they live by. They have different languages, different environments that they operate in, and yet they have the same goal: to bring a successful, robust AI product to market and deploy it in a robust manner to create, clinical, financial, and operational value for its stakeholders. Now, when data scientists, opt to, strictly speaking, work in a Python-heavy, notebook-heavy environment, how does that allow for collaboration between, them and clinicians or quality people or regulatory people? It doesn't exactly. So that's why for many years, the entire mantra of the industry has been, let data scientists do their thing, operate in a silo, and hope and pray that what they end up building actually fits the expectations of the regulatory and compliance realities and clinical realities of the world that they're trying to enter, which usually fails, to be fair. So therefore, you have to establish direct, ongoing communication and collaboration, between all these teams, and make sure that they're driving toward the same direction. And so that's why we have built a platform to have establish a common denominator across these teams, and so that when you look at a model, you know exactly what you're looking at, both from a clinical perspective or a regulatory perspective or a data science perspective. Right now, people are throwing PowerPoint slides at each other or Excel sheets at each other just to infer what might have been in one point in time of a specific AI product.
Yeah, and what we were able to achieve with Inez and Dr. Patel really was an agile sandbox, right? It's closed. We can able to go in there and we are able to do all of our what if scenarios, come out with, the requisite FDA ready graphs, charts, and all of the data that we need to put into the submission. And that was able to be done in an agile way. Regulatory does not have to be a drag. I liked the last bullet here, Inez, in that, where our approach is agile. Our approach is, how can we take the data, use that data, and get to the stand up, make a decision, and then move on, right? So really, by using this type of approach, we're scalable. We can get into new markets. We can put our new variants through and really produce, the portfolio of different AI models at the different technology readiness levels, 1 through 9, because not all of your technology readiness levels are going to be at 9. So to be able to have that plethora of portfolio and make those decisions with the clinicians is what's so exciting about this process.
And so to build on what Tanima just said, I mean, so as we said, AI is a team sport. But when you look at it from a tangible perspective, the market success of an AI product is usually owned by regulatory leaders and business unit leaders, and they're directly detached oftentimes from the groups that actually build those AI products. So therefore, if you ask a regulatory leader or a business unit leader asking about a specific product in their AI portfolio, where's my MRI solution that specializes in specific oncological use case for or tumor growth, etc. They would not be able to easily answer where their AI is and whether they're regulatory ready or clinical ready. So it's just basically a whole array of question marks that are being thrown around between different interdisciplinary teams, but we don't have a control tower that allows these regulatory and product leaders to basically have a direct thumb on the pulse of the success of a given AI product. That's exactly what we have built at Gesund, to be able to enable those leaders and not strictly depend on Python heavy, notebook heavy environments, but coexist appropriately with their data science and clinical and quality counterparts. So therefore, when you talk about future proofing, it's about an infrastructure approach. It's about systems thinking. It's about treating evidence as a machine, just like the model itself is a living, breathing organism, so to say. So therefore, as you look at these AI models and portfolios of AI models and their entire continuum and how they must be governed across jurisdictions and end users, then it becomes quite unwieldy very quickly unless you have already invested into an infrastructure approach. So therefore, it is indeed on the manufacturers and these days more so, and this is also a topic of discussion absolutely today, now also on the end users to own part of the responsibility to make sure that the monitoring is exercised appropriately and the models are updated appropriately. So therefore, invest in infrastructure, have the systems mindset, make sure that the AI is indeed a team sport, and then you can govern the life cycle across the portfolios that you have to manage and make sure that all stakeholders contribute appropriately, not just data scientists. So maybe to open up the Q&A session, these are some of the exemplary questions that we had in mind. But I'm sure Greg, we had some folks from the audience who had wanted to raise some questions as well. So at this point, I'd like to thank you all and thank my colleagues here for this exchange, and looking forward to opening up the Q&A session.
Yeah, thanks, Inez. We do have a number of questions that have been published here, so I'm happy to go through and read off unless you guys have any other pertinent topics that you want to raise ahead of that.
That sounds good.
Great. So I'll just jump to the bottom here of what was posted originally. So mentioning, please explain how do you collect clinical evidence for any changes in the AI algorithm? What are the processes and what are the sources of clinical evidence? So I think that speaks to, I want to say it was back on slide 9, the transparency aspect that you guys are speaking to.
Yep, I'll definitely take a stab at this, and Tanima and Samir, I'm sure you'll want to chime in as well. But it's a function of what exactly the AI solution does, and there's a whole gamut of AI solutions out there with and without an interface, and how they interface with different decision makers and end users. But ultimately, it's about what kind of mechanisms you have, and depending also on the intended use and the risk profile of the AI solution. Obviously, you'll want to connect number one, the outputs of these models, and you don't necessarily always have whether those outputs are indeed accurate or reliable, but they should definitely, at the very bare minimum, collect those outputs and have them in a auditable and analysis ready environment across cohorts and different use cases of interest, I'll argue. But as some of the distribution of these output variables go beyond your predicted or preset bounds, that's when you can have a traffic light mechanism to intervene to make sure that okay, so for this cohort or for this model or for this label, whatever the case might be, it warrants a specific intervention and deep dive that can be as rigorous as a regulatory grade, expert panel driven, adjudication based, judgment of the quality of those outputs. Now, so therefore, it's a stage-based approach based on what kind of AI products you deal with. You have to collect the outputs regularly. You have to look at how they resonate with the real-world environment, and then be ready to preset bounds and intervene when necessary to see if you want to change or update or retire a given model. But Tanima, Samir, I'm sure you'll have other points.
Yeah, so as part of clinical evaluation reporting, what's going to be very critical is your data collection, and making sure that you're generating the clinical evidence as per the intended use of the device. So, clinical evaluation plan, your protocol, your clinical reporting, periodic review of that, as well as your post-market surveillance data, will all feed back into the entire clinical evaluation, as well as your, use-related risk analysis and all the work that you're doing from a usability perspective with the clinicians. Dr. Patel?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And the key here is, as Enes and Tamina have talked about, is that this clinical evidence is not collected ad hoc. It's generated through this predefined controlled process. And so you know what you're getting. Everything starts with classification, whether that is performance affecting or affecting the workflow, or if it's purely technical. All of that determines the level of clinical evidence that you need. And not every change needs a new clinical study, but every change does need justification. And so once you have this primary source of clinical evidence, you have it curated, you have version lock clinical data, and then that reflects what the real use is. And that's what we're kind of using to collect this evidence for any change that occurs.
Excellent. I'll continue reading through some of these questions here and just welcome others to, again, please feel free to submit questions up in the Q&A section at the top of your screen. But the next would be, with Total Product Lifecycle, how do you observe and document the data layer beneath third-party foundational models like GPT or Claude or Gemini? Is this done?
Anyone, if you'd like to take it first step?
Yeah, sure. So, the first thing is you're going to have, a test plan, test protocol, to be able to say, okay, well, here's my data set that I'm going to use to be able to prove out how this tool is being used to ensure accuracy of the output. So again, the methodology should be, here's my source of truth, here's the data that I'm using as part of my validation of the model that I'm using, and then use real world data to feed back to see whether or not you're meeting your acceptance criteria or not. Enes?
Yeah, so those are the core principles of how you establish those validation requirements. But of course, when we talk about some of the foundation models or Gen AI based models, the Claude and the Chat GPTs of the world, and there's also some medically customized versions coming out as well. And right now, it's still a fairly gray zone as to what kind of expectations you have to hit. So far, the FDA has not cleared a LLM based AI solution like Claude for healthcare or ChatGPT for healthcare. But what we expect, based on our experiences with the agency, the core principles that Tanima described hold. It's about establishing the truth. It's about establishing the representativeness of your cohorts of the U.S. population, and then hitting the metrics in a traceable, repeatable way. And so therefore, even though it's a new realm as to how these foundation models will interact with other parts of the product spectrum of the medical field, we still expect the FDA to stipulate such requirements.
Yeah, and I think the human in the loop is still going to be there to be able to confirm that none of the data was corrupted, none of the data had been there was some kind of hallucination that came up with a new suggested finding or observation. I don't know if you would agree with that, Dr. Patel.
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's the human in the loop, or in this case, the physician clinical person in the loop, is absolutely key. That clinical evidence is generated at the system level. We're using physician-led annotation and adjudication. These locked metrics demonstrate that the clinical behavior of the product, not the LLM behavior, but the clinical behavior of the product remains within the predefined bounds. And so we're not, even if that underlying model is changed or not, the clinical output is still remaining acceptable.
Excellent. I'm going to continue reading here, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. I like this question that just came through. I'm working in the AI governance space, highly focused on HDI 5, digital power of attorney rule. In what ways should risk analysis differ for agentic AI as compared to deployment of AI products that do not operationalize agents, particularly for HDI 5, as that becomes standard?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at this. I mean, agentic AI is an interesting one because agentic AI brings a multi-layer integration of AI solutions into the workflow. In other words, in the older days, let's say several years ago, we're talking about AI end products that interface with clinical decision makers, right? So you know exactly what you're dealing with, single model oftentimes, and then time passed, and then we're looking at multi-model, solutions hitting. But now with the advent of agentic AI, you have many agents that operate in the background that, unless you have a governance infrastructure in place, you don't know at all as to how these agents function and how they trigger different events, different decision makings, until that final human interface and decision making is being exercised. So therefore, the agentic governance is a new topic, as it's as important as the governance of single AI products, and there are ways to basically manage those agents as intelligently as you could have years ago for a single AI product, but definitely something to be cautious of, because these agents are not as visible or not in front and center when you're talking about decision making. And so therefore, especially healthcare providers, and Sumira, I don't know if you have 2 cents to add here, but clinical decision makers and healthcare providers have a particularly sensitive responsibility to make sure those agents are managed just as well as the end products.
Yeah, I think that from an interoperability perspective, that's something we're going to have to basically show that we can. I think the proposal is to relax certification for certain subgroups, right? So, I think that this is going to be still evolving, but I think that what's really, really key is that we're able to understand what impact that has on current interoperability testing.
This is something that's talked about a lot in physician circles. So AI, for non-agentic AI, the risk analysis is pretty epistemic in nature. We're asking, is it output accurate? Is it biased? Is it reliable? The clinician is the decision maker in the end. So the risks are there, but they're informational only. With agentic AI, that risk model fundamentally changes. And so now the risk, instead of being informational, it becomes operational and fiduciary. So the system is now making these decisions instead of the clinician. So then you have all these different types of risks to consider. You have the authority risk. What is the agent authorized to do? Under what conditions? Under whose behalf? You have containment risk. What happens if it gets out of hand? You have to have hard guardrails for these kinds of models and these kinds of agents that are going on. You have to have traceability and revocability. So every decision that it makes has to be very traceable, just like it is for clinicians. And it has to be revocable, just like it is for clinicians. If clinician decisions get out of hand, we have mechanisms in place to revoke that person's license. So similar models have to exist in the agentic world. And then, of course, just like in the real world, you have to have failure mode escalation. So when an agent is failing, a human will notice, or if my human colleague is failing, I will notice. And so if you remain silent, that's how the whole system fails. That's how suboptimal care happens, and that's how patient safety concerns rise. So we have to make sure that there's failure mode escalation for these agentic AIs as they get out into practice.
Excellent. I'll jump back to the queue then. A couple of questions. I'm actually going to group these in together, but do you feel that this AI model will separate you from the other full body companies as a better choice, or will this be best used to read faster, less misses, or peer review? How does your solution handle disagreements to improve? And so I'll tack on to that list of questions as well, any known limitations that you'd like to share as well. So perhaps a question on differentiation and limitations as well.
So this tool is giving us additional data to support the clinical decision support framework for our HCPs. So again, the device is providing quantification of body fat, muscle, and organs, and then this data is used, to make some decisions by the healthcare professional with a patient report. I think that it's valuable from a preventive perspective. It provides, inputs to, your longevity. It'll provide inputs to a lot of different things with longitudinal data. So it is a device that will provide us with, a great baseline for patients. So, I think it is a preventive tool. By no way does it supplant Dr. Patel and his decision. The human in the loop still makes the final decisions on anything to do with the device. The intended use is not a diagnostic device.
Excellent. I think that speaks well to it. I'll keep asking questions here and encourage others to continue to post. In what ways do you leverage your health informatics team members in the process? In what ways can the informatics team be more effective and engaged?
Anyone?
Yeah, so we're trending the data. So, what's really important is, using the business intelligence and statistics, we're able to look at, what's happening from the real world data and how can we feed that back into new models. So, certainly, the information is being collected, reported, recorded, trended, and then fed back to our models so that we can look at, new intended uses for future development of AI models. So I think that, certainly the informatics data is providing us with insights as to new pathways for development of our investigational devices. And, then we have our research and commercial streams and decisions with our clinicians. So it's really, really valuable to be able to work with, people like Dr. Patel to be able to look at the usability of the data and then, feed back into the new models that we have in development over the next 5-year pipeline.
Amazing. And is there, in addition to that informatics and trend analysis, integration of health economic evidences that are required for reimbursement, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is always a struggle, right? The reimbursement models, I think, are something that, we have to do cross-functionally with a lot of the teams and, collect that data. But there are programs like NTAP and the like, where we can, try to be able to develop, a model and then go through that iterative approach through NTAP. And, certainly I think that is a pathway to be able to get these models reimbursed.
Excellent. And I'll rapid fire in the last couple minutes here. So Tanima, you mentioned some trade-offs between building features into products versus leveraging the PCCP. Can you elaborate on this experience and how it affected validation? Any lessons learned with respect to selecting acceptance criteria for AI and validation, for example, defining bias, drift, et cetera, and appreciate your sharing that.
Yeah, sure. I think that, the design review for verification and validation shouldn't be a 1-hour, session. What was going to happen is that you're going to have different acceptance criteria, and for each one of the structures that you're looking at. And I think that what's really, really key is to be able to say, well, what, this is similar to, a similar device. If you don't have a predicate, you're going to have to set a boundary condition during your research stage and be able to see whether or not this is a complex, medium, or simple structure. And then what you're going to do in the design review is you're going to be able to have to set some very clear go, no go targets. So, verification design review, validation design review shouldn't be a one-time process, because what's going to happen is you will have input from the model tuning to be able to say, all right, what, we're gonna go with this model with this version, and these are the ones we're going to put in PCCP, and then continue to iterate. So I think that the process you have to use and the mechanism you have to use is to look very deeply at the training and tuning and testing data sets at those verification and validation reviews, those design reviews, and be able to make a collective decision on what that acceptance criteria, whether it's good enough, and then know that you're going to submit with potential interactive and substantive questions that you'll be able to answer when you get to that point with the reviewer. Dr. Patel, you're nodding, yes?
I'm just agreeing. I like what you're saying. It makes complete sense. Thanks, Tanima.
Amazing. Well, I know we're right up against time. Any other final comments from our presenters?
No, this has been great. Thank you for the team, Tanima, Samir, Greg, of course, for the audience that have come up with these very, thought-provoking questions. This is a very hot and fast evolving space. Ascertaining quality for AI is not a solved problem yet, but we're happy that we're part of this, exciting community that is keen to have an open discussion. And so we look forward to building on the dialogue through the chat community.
Yeah, completely agreed. Amazing. Well, thanks again to our presenters, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Looking forward to next month.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks all.